This is a lecture from OpenTuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
This is the second lecture on chapter 24 on variance analysis. And if you remember, in the first of these lectures, we did example 1. We produced a flexed budget. We compared the actual results and we've worked out the total variances. And I said that where the real work starts on variances is we've got to look at those variances and we've got to analyse them and find out why they occurred. And so let's go through the cost variances first of all, one by one. First of all, materials. We've worked out the total variance. We know from the cost card that we've overspent 3255. We've overspent, it's adverse. And I said we want to know why, because the standard cost, according to the cost card, it should be 4 kilos of material for each unit. The materials should cost us £4.50 per kilo. That's where the 18 came from. And as I said at the end of the last lecture, we need to find out, did we pay £4.50 a kilo or not? And separately, did we use 4 kilos or not? And so let's look at the two separately. First of all, I'll look at the £4.50 a kilo. We call this the price or the expenditure variance. And appreciate, all I care about for this one is, did we pay £4.50 or didn't we? That's all that matters to me. And so to check, we compare the actual purchases at actual cost. So how much did we buy? We bought 35,464 kilos. Look back at the question, obviously. And how much did it actually cost us? It says we actually spent on materials 163,455. I want to know whether we paid the right price or not. So let's work out how much we should have paid. The actual purchases at standard cost. So again, we did buy 35,464. How much should we have paid per kilo? From the cost card, it should have been $4.50. And therefore, we should have spent in total 35,464, 450. We should have paid 159,588. So we obviously paid more than we should have done. And how much was the overspend? Can't be right. 163,455 minus 159,588. Yeah, we overspent 3,867. And because we overspent, we paid more than 450, it's adverse. So that sorted that out. And although we'll have a chat later, we'd be asking the purchasing manager to explain how that happened. We've now got to look at whether we use the right quantity or not. So this time, I don't care about the price. We assume we paid the right price. All I care about is, did we use 4 kilos or didn't we? And we call this the usage variance. And to check whether we used too many or too few kilos, we compare our actual usage in kilos. How many kilos did we actually use? Again, from the question, it was 35,464. We'll compare that with how much we should have used, the standard usage for the actual production. Remember, there's no point in comparing with the original budget production. If you produce more, you obviously expect to use more. But how much should we have used? We actually produced 8,900 units. From the cost card, we should have used 4 kilos a unit. And therefore, in total, we should have used 35,600 kilos. And so here we've actually saved a bit. We've managed to use a bit less material, perhaps we wasted a bit less than we expected. But we've saved the difference of 136 kilos. If that's all that had changed, how much money would that have saved us? Well, if that's the only thing that had changed, at standard cost per kilo, we'd have saved, how much was it? 450 a kilo. We'd have saved 136 times 450, 612. We saved on material on its own, that would have saved us money, and therefore it's favourable. And there we are. Does it check? Those two together, an overspend of 3,867 less a saving of 612 is a net overspend of 3,255, which was the total we arrived at earlier. We've analysed the variance into why it happened. And again, we'd be it's the purchasing manager who's like to be responsible for the expense variance. We want him to or her to explain why we overspent. It's probably the production manager responsible for the usage variance. They seem to have done reasonably well. Incidentally, before we go through the others, because all of them are learning rules, you must learn the rules for each variance. Don't rely on being able to check with a total, because in many, many questions, especially the multiple choice ones, you won't be asked to flex a budget first. It'll simply ask you, what is the usage variance, or what is the expenditure variance? You won't have time in the exam to start getting the total and checking, that it works. However, that's materials. Let's carry on with the next one, which is labour. And again, because we've actually got it here, I will write down what was the total variance. Where is it? 2015 adverse. Again, we're going to analyse it, and if you look at the cost card, it should be 5 hours a unit at $5 per hour, 25. And so in a similar way to materials, we know we spent more than 25, but was it because we paid them more than $5 an hour? Or was it because they took more or less than 5 hours a unit? As you'll see in a minute, there is actually one more variance involved here, but I'll explain as we go along. But let's look first of all at the $5. Did we pay $5 an hour or didn't we? And we call this the rate of pay variance. And in a very similar way to what we did with the expenditure variance for materials, we take the actual hours we paid at the actual cost. And in a minute we compare with what we should have paid. Well, how many hours did we pay for? The question says we paid for 45,400 hours. Don't worry for the moment about the fact they only worked 44,100. I'll think about that in a second. But we paid for 45,400 hours. And how much in total did we pay? 224,515. Well, again, I want to know whether that was more or less than $5 an hour. So we say, how much should we have paid? Actual hours paid. At standard cost, well, again, those 45,400 hours we paid for, we should have paid $5 an hour, and therefore we should have paid in total 227,000. So here we actually did rather well. We paid a lot less than we'd have expected, and it saved us $2,485. We paid less than expected, it saved us money, which means more profit, so it's favourable. Let's carry on though. I'm no longer worried about cost, we've dealt with that. But now let's look at the fact that although we paid them for 45,400 hours, they only worked 44,100. Why are we paying them for hours when they weren't actually working? Well, maybe, just for example, maybe the machines broke down for a while. And so while they were being repaired, the workers couldn't work. But perhaps we still had to pay them. But whatever the reason, surely if we pay them for hours when they're not working, that's obviously costing us money. It's losing us money. And so let's look at how much it was costing us. And we call this the idle time variance. Idle time is time when, although you're being paid, you're not actually doing any work. And so let's see how many hours were involved here. How many hours were they being paid when they weren't doing anything? Well, we compare the actual hours paid $45,400 with the actual hours they worked. $44,100. And so we paid them for the difference 1,300 hours. We paid them for 1,300 hours when they weren't working. And if they're not working, again, that's obviously losing us money. And how much would it have lost us if that's all that went wrong? Well, at standard cost per hour, which was what, $5, that would have cost us 6,500. It's adverse. That on its own lost us money. And finally, there is one more thing, of course. Now we know how many hours they actually worked. We can see whether that's more or less than the hours they should have worked. You know, they should have taken 5 hours a unit. And so the final variance is what we call the efficiency variance. For efficiency, let's compare how many hours they worked with how many hours they should have worked. So the actual hours worked, were 44,100. How many hours should they have worked? The standard hours for the actual production. Well, remember, we actually produced 8,900 units. Each unit should have taken 5 hours. And so we expected them to work 44,500 hours. hours. And so they actually did quite well. They obviously worked a bit faster than we've expected. We've managed to save 400 hours. And again, if that's all that had changed, how much money would it have saved us? Well, at standard cost per hour of $5, it would have saved us 2,000. Saved money, more profit favourable. And so there we are. I mean, again, it's learning the rules. There's no easy way around it. Once you learn the rules, it's just obviously being careful. Although I said earlier, don't waste time in the exam checking. Here we can, because the total of those, 2485 favourable minus 6500 adverse plus 2000 favourable. The total has come to 2015 adverse, which should agree with the total we had before. Yes, it does. All right, let's just do one more for this lecture, otherwise it gets too long. But the next cost we stand to have to deal with is variable overheads. Again, if you look back, the total variance, I think it was 1652, was it? Where is it? Yes, 1652 favourable. And the cost per unit was 10, but from the cost card, it should have been 5 hours at $2 per hour, $10. And the 5 hours, it's obviously being charged on the basis of labour hours. There was 5 hours of labour, and that should have been $5 an hour. But for the same reason, there's 5 hours of variable overheads. They should have been $2 an hour. And again, we'll check, did we pay $2 an hour for variable overheads? Secondly, did we work 5 hours a unit? Let's look at the $2 first of all, and we call this the expenditure variance. However, one very important thing here, for overheads, we do assume that we're only paying overheads during hours they're actually working. You know, when we did labour, we said, oh, we're paying them for all those hours when they're doing no work at all. Well, fine, we had that idle time variance. But with overheads, we assume that there are only overheads while they're actually doing work. If they're not working, then there are no overheads. So to check on the expenditure, we take the actual hours worked at actual cost. So they actually worked 44,100 hours. And the actual cost was 87,348. How much should we have paid for those hours? Well, the actual hours worked at standard cost. They worked 44,100 hours. And the overheads, it should have cost $2 an hour. A total of 88,200. So we have paid a little bit less than $2 an hour, and how much has that saved us? 88,200 minus 87,348. 852. Favourable. We paid less, we've saved money. And having dealt with that, The other bit to look at is, did they work 5 hours or not? Did they take longer or were they faster? And this is the efficiency variance. And for the efficiency variance, to see whether they were quicker or slower, compare the actual hours worked uh, 44,100. Compare with the hours they should have worked, the standard hours for the actual production. They actually produced 8,900 units. They should have worked 5 hours a unit. A total of 8,900 times 5. 44,500. And so they saved 400 hours. And do note, that's exactly the same workings, exactly the same as for the labour, for the same reasons. But with labour, we were saving $5 an hour. With variable overheads, standard cost per hour is $2. Total 800. They worked faster, we've saved money. And if you want to check back, the total of these two is 1652, which is what we had before. All right, I'll stop this lecture here because partly it's getting too long, but also fixed overheads, the one cost remaining, is a bit funny. I mean, these three are all similar, and I hope you see the logic. Fixed overheads are a little bit strange, and so I'll leave them for the next lecture.